Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Didn't think I was ever going to do this many shows, but, well, it just keeps on going. And you'd think after this amount of time I'd already be used to all these glitches and weird problems that crop up, but every time I'm about to do a show, I find some weird plug that needs to be worked on, or a button that's been pushed. Oh, well, that's life. I don't do shout-outs. I don't think it really adds much to the show. However, I just heard from a fan in Lisbon, Portugal. Fate Real said she liked the show, so howdy to Portugal. If you do happen to listen to the show from some far-off distant land like Maine or Canada or other parts of the globe, send me an email. I'd like to hear at least your location. You don't really have to say anything, just mention that you listen to the show and what country you're in. You can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Mark your calendars. April 5th and 6th in Edinburgh, the UFO Festival and Conference. Friday evening, there will be a festival at the Edinburgh City Hall. Fun for the whole family. Then Saturday at 9, the conference will begin at the Edinburgh Conference Center at Renaissance, 118 Paseo del Prado in Edinburgh, Texas. This year's speakers will be Donald R. Schmidt, who worked with the legendary Dr. J. Allen Hynek as one of his special investigators. A former director of the Hynek Center for UFO Studies and its director of special investigations for 10 years. Donald is one of the world's top experts on the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book and its chief scientist. If you watch the TV show, you'll want to meet someone who actually knows the real story. It's amazing how Hollywood can take a really, really interesting story and mess with it. 1973, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson were fishing off a pier on the west bank of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. 3 unearthly beings came out of the craft. They paralyzed them and then took them aboard. Calvin Parker will be there in Edinburgh to tell you his firsthand exactly what happened. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt will talk about the Rendlesham UFO incident that took place in England back in 1980. Colonel Halt will make a rare public appearance to speak about what he saw in the forest during this world-famous UFO incident. Don't miss the amazing story as told by the principal witness, the deputy commander of the airbase. I've heard him tell about the incident on the radio, but there is nothing like being there in person to get the whole story. A British UFO researcher, Nick Redfern, who has been on the show, is one of the world's top authors on UFOs and the paranormal. He's an expert on UFO abduction cases. Nick will talk about his new book, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. You've seen him on Ancient Aliens, so now come meet him in person. He's a really nice guy, and you'll want to get your picture taken with him. Be sure to buy one or two of his books. They make really good presents. Ben Moss from the History Channel's TV series Hangar 1, The UFO Files, will be in Edinburgh as well. Ben is a chief UFO investigator for the Mutual UFO Network and a member of a task force that responds quickly to major UFO events that occur in America. The sixth speaker is another top UFO investigator from MUFON who has appeared on the TV show Hangar 1, The UFO Files as well. Tony Angiola has been investigating UFOs since the early 1990s and will bring the results of his long career of UFO research to our audience in Edinburgh. The night before the show, April 4th, 2019, Thursday evening, Ben Moss and Tony Angiola will be at the Edinburgh City Auditorium from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. This is kind of a pre-conference get-together. The auditorium is right behind the Edinburgh City Hall, where the festival will be held. The Edinburgh Out of This World UFO Conference and Festival has been ranked number 3 out of the top 10 festivals for UFOs and alien lovers in the world. This is an incredible honor for the city of Edinburgh and all the folks who have supported their UFO events over the past 6 years. If you're interested in the conference or the festival, you can get more information by visiting the Dustin Michael Sukala Memorial Library, which is located at 1906 South Closner in Edinburgh, or you can call 956-383-6246. The website is www.edinburgh.lib.tx.us. You can also visit them on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Edinburgh UFO. I hope to see you there. Come by and buy a book or just chat. Speaking of books, I wrote the Laredo Paranormal Research Society back in 2016. When I finished the book, we were still missing a few things because some folks were out of town and a few of the stories hadn't been finished. I told Ishmael I could edit the book as things got finished up. In 2017, I added a few dozen pages to the book and I submitted it to the printers. What I didn't know was the file I sent had gotten messed up somehow, and the book I sold last year were not in good shape. If you bought one of my books, you may have saw what I'm talking about. Words and paragraphs I had taken out were struck through instead of being deleted. It just made the book look bad, and the chapter headings weren't in the right location, the paragraph breaks were all over the place, and there were widows and orphans everywhere. Now, that's a writer's term. So, if you bought a copy, you can bring it back or simply let me know and I will replace the book. I was surprised when I finally noticed the editing mistakes. I will be at the auditorium, I'll be at the festival, and I will have a table set up at the conference. So swing by, let me know if you got one of the rotten, nasty, horrible, improperly edited books. I'll be more than happy to replace it. Hollywood is a strange place. A lot of the folks who work there have some really weird ideas. When Horace and Dieta Wilcox founded Hollywood in 1887, they hoped it would become a religious community. They were both prohibitionists, and they banned the use of liquor from the town, and they would offer free land to anyone willing to build a church. It's changed considerably from what it was originally intended for. Kind of like Las Vegas was originally founded by the Mormons as a way station for settlers moving to the west. The shortest dialogue script since the introduction of what they're calling talkies was written for the Mel Brooks silent movie, which came out in 1976. It had only one spoken word throughout the entire movie, which was none, which means no. It was spoken by Marcel Marceau, who is a world-famous mime, so he never actually talks during any of his performances. The silent movie is hilarious. If you haven't seen it, what are you waiting for? The American Humane Association objected to the scene in Shawshank Redemption, which came out in 1994, where the character Brooks feeds his crow a maggot. The AHA stated it was cruel to the maggot, and it required that the crow be fed a maggot that had died from natural causes. The really funny thing about this whole argument is maggots don't die from natural causes. They turn into flies. Flies die from natural causes called a fly swatter. Isn't there something out there a little more intelligent that these people could be complaining about rather than a maggot being fed to a bird? 1923, Mark Sennett, Harry Chandler, and the Los Angeles Times put up the Hollywood Land sign, which was later shortened to Hollywood. They were publicizing a real estate development. The sign cost $21,000. If you saw the movie The Rocketeer, which came out in 1919, correction, that would have been 1991. 1919, right. Okay, 1991. The villain, played by Timothy Dalton, tries to escape from a burning Zeppelin. And as he's jumping out the door, he says, "I will miss Hollywood." And then he crashes into the sign, destroying the land part of the sign, so he really did miss Hollywood. The three main characters in Rebel Without a Cause, which was 1955 movie, all met untimely deaths. James Dean died in a car crash. Natalie Wood drowned, and Sal Mineo was stabbed to death. Sounds like that was the kind of movie you wanted to avoid. Thomas Edison invented the first moving pictures, which were small film images that could be viewed inside of a box. Initially, he was opposed to showing movies on the big screen because he thought one-on-one viewing would be more profitable. And Edison was all about profit. If you wanted to make a movie, you had to pay royalties to Edison since you were using his equipment that he had invented, even though you had paid for the equipment. If you failed to hand over the money, Edison would send some thugs around to collect it. If you refused, they would break up your equipment and burn down your studio. This is why in 1915 the people making movies all began moving west to get as far from Edison as they could. That's why movies were mostly made in California. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960 was the first American film to show a toilet being flushed on screen. The shower scene where the blood swirls down the drain, well, that stuff was actually Hershey's syrup. In black and white, it kind of looked like blood. The movie Psycho was based on a real person, a guy named Ed Gein. You'll hear a little more about him later on. Now, come to think of it, Silence of the Lambs was based on Ed as well. And don't forget the movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre. 3 films, all from one crazy old dude. I don't like sequels. Most of them don't work. Usually the first try is the best, and then some yahoo decides he can do it better, and the outcome is usually far from interesting. Lots of CGI and very little acting. The original Thing, from Another World, came out in 1951. It starred Margaret Sheridan, Kenneth Tobey, Robert Cornthwaite, Douglas Spencer, James Young, and Dewey Martin. Oh yes, and the Thing was played by James Arness, the guy that was famous for Gunsmoke. Arness had wanted to be a Navy pilot, but he was too tall, coming in at 6'7", so he went into the Army instead. As the landing craft was coming in at Anzio Beach, Arness was the first man off the landing ramp. He was sent first to see how deep the water was. He was shot through the leg and had to be evacuated. His leg injury caused him trouble for the rest of his life. The Thing from Another Planet was based on a book called Who Goes There? If you read the book, you might notice that the movie didn't really follow the book very well, but it was still a cool movie. Then, in 1982, The Thing came out. Obviously a remake. But I like John Carpenter's movies, so I went. Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, T.K. Carter, just to name a few. Well, I was impressed. It was as good as the original. It was the first time a sequel actually worked out, at least for me. The second Thing actually followed the book more closer than the first one. In 2011, there was a third remake. The Thing, directed by Matthias von Hecken Jr. The cast was made up from the U.S. and Norway. It starred Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Joel Edgerton, Ulrich Thompson, and a whole bunch of others I can't pronounce. I watched it with great trepidation. That means unease and apprehension. I just knew it was going to suck. I was wrong. The movie is not only very good, it worked out with the other 2 movies. I won't go into too much detail because my nephew hasn't seen it yet, and I don't want to spoil it for him. If you haven't watched number 3, go for it. Watch it. It's actually worth watching, but you've got to see all 3 movies. And of course, I also recommend reading the book. It was pretty good too, so those are my recommendations. Aristoteles Telly Savalas was born on January 21st, 1922. He became an American actor who was best known for his tough guy character movie roles. Back when I was in the 49th Armored Division, my favorite movie was Kelly's Heroes. We all kind of acted like Oddball and his crew. Savalas played Big Joe, the sergeant in charge of the guys who go in and steal all that gold. I didn't include the movie when I was talking about cheesy movies because, well, it wasn't. The movie was an action story with some weird humor. Things like buying the Germans' tank and uniforms. If you can't beat 'em, pay 'em off. Well, Savalas also served in the United States Army from 1943 till 1946. He received a Purple Heart, which means he lost blood for his country. Very little. I hate that thing. Some guy keeps calling, wanting to inspect the roof of my house. They've been calling every day for the last 3 weeks. He just won't take no for an answer. I know it's a scam already. What these people will do is they'll come by, they'll inspect your roof, and they'll say, oh, yes, you need a new roof, and by the way, we can get your insurance to pay for it. And then they go through this long process of pretty much screwing your insurance company out of a whole lot of money, and they might not do a good job on the roof. Getting back to the story. Very little is known about Telly Savalas' time in the Army because the records were lost in a fire. He did go to Army medical school, so he was probably an Army medic. Savalas hosted a radio show called Coffee House in Texas City. Correction, in New York City, Texas City. He hosted a radio show called Coffee House in New York City. I had to put that in there since I just love coffee. Years before Telly Savalas was an acting success, he had what could only be classified as a paranormal encounter. Late one night, 1959, he was driving home to Long Island from a date when his car ran out of gas. Somebody wasn't paying attention to all those gauges on the dashboard. Sitting on the side of the road, he was in a bad place. There were no houses around and all the stores were closed. His only option was to start walking the several miles to get gas and then turn around and walk back. And suddenly, out of nowhere, Tony heard a voice, kind of a high-pitched voice, asking if he needed a ride. Turning, he saw an old man sitting in a Cadillac. The driver was wearing a white suit. His surprise was overshadowed with the question of how did this car drive up behind him without making any sound? You've heard the saying, never look a gift horse in the mouth. Or how about beware of Greeks bearing gifts? Or gifts bearing Greeks? They all come from the same incident, as in the Trojan horse, and Savalas was Greek. Not wanting to walk so far late at night, Savalas said yes, he would love a ride and jumped into the front seat. On the drive to the gas station, the driver suddenly said he knew a Red Sox ball player and gave the name. The comment was completely out of context, but Savalas just went with it, not wishing to upset the man who'd come to his aid. Once they got to the gas station, Tony discovered he didn't have any money on him. He'd spent all of his money on his date, and he didn't have a dime to his name. The driver handed him $1 to go buy gas with. Gas was a lot cheaper back then, like 20 cents a gallon. Savalas told the man to give him his address and he'd send the money back. The driver wrote down his phone number and address on a piece of paper and handed it over. The pair then drove back to where Savalas had left his car. The driver even stuck around to see to it the car started, and then he drove away. The next day, as Tony was coming home from work, he saw a newspaper that said the Red Sox ball player that the driver had mentioned had been found dead under mysterious circumstances. Tony thought this was weird, and he mentioned it to his mother. He then called the phone number so he could return the money from the other night. The phone was answered by a woman. Tony asked to speak to James Cullen. The woman said he's not available. So Tony asked when he could get with the man, and he was told that Cullen had been dead for 2 years. Well, Tony tried to explain how he'd been given a ride just the other night. Well, the woman hung up on him. This really got under Tony's skin. So he kept pursuing things until finally the woman agreed to meet with him. Tony described the man who had helped him and showed her the note. The handwriting matched letters the woman had received from her husband. When Tony mentioned the high-pitched voice, the woman said no, her husband had a deep-pitched voice. Well, Tony finally got around to asking how James had died. The woman said he committed suicide. He shot himself through the neck, right where the vocal cords were. Tony said this incident gave him shivers any time he thought about it, and he thought about it a lot. Have you ever heard the song The Ride by David Allan Coe? It's kind of the same story. Tony Savalas died January 22nd, 1994, the day after his birthday. He was 72 years old. What a lot of folks don't know is Tony had a brother who was also an actor. Georgios Demetrius Savalas. If you did see Kelly's Heroes, the artillery guy who was sleeping with the bar of gold under his arm, under his cheek, well, that was Giorgio. He was also in Kojak. He played the part of Detective Stavros, the big guy with all the black curly hair. The Pongbok hand is an artifact from a Buddhist monastery in Pongbak, Nepal. The monks who lived at the monastery said the hand is from a yeti. A finger bone from the hand was tested and the DNA turned out to be human. If you watched Expedition Unknown and saw the search for the yeti, you'll see that the monks are very careful who gets to see their relics, and they seldom let anybody touch them. It wasn't always that way. In 1967, there was a cartoon called Tom Slick. Well, I'm not talking about that guy, but there was an oil man, an adventurer, who was also named Tom Slick. He was looking for Yeti back in the 1950s. He'd heard accounts of the possible existence of a Yeti hand, and it was being used for rituals at a monastery in Pongbok during one of his first abominable snowman treks in 1957. The Slick expeditions were the first to photograph the hand and show it to the rest of the world and explain what was being hidden away in the Himalayas. Tom Slick still had a business to run, so he would send out expeditions paying thousands of dollars to look for the elusive creature. One of the guys he'd hired, Peter Byron, managed to sneak into the monastery and steal a finger from the hand. He said he replaced the missing digit with a human finger. I kind of wonder where he got the finger from. Byron smuggled the finger bone out of Nepal and into India. But now he was worried about getting the stolen property into the United States. Some customs official might see the bones and ask how and why Peter had them, and this might lead to his being arrested. This was not what Peter wanted. Back in those days, all foreign travelers stayed in the same few hotels. There just wasn't much to choose from. Byron met up with Jimmy Stewart, an internationally known film star. Somehow, I would just love to have heard that conversation. Byron trying to convince Stewart to smuggle a stolen finger bone into the United States. It had to have been interesting. I'll bet there was a lot of alcohol involved. Jimmy Stewart was a film star before he joined the military. He was also a private pilot with over 400 hours of flight time. When World War II broke out, Stewart joined the Army and was assigned to the Air Corps. December 13th, 1943, Stewart flew a B-17 bomber to attack the U-boat facilities in Kiel, Germany, followed 3 days later by a mission to Bremen. Stewart was one of the few Americans to ever rise from private to colonel in only 4 years during World War II. So smuggling bones into the United States probably sounded kind of unexciting. The bones were placed in Stewart's wife, Gloria McLean's, luggage. They were wrapped in her underthingies. As the couple were passing through customs, the piece of luggage with the bones in it disappeared. It got set in the wrong line and it didn't make it out the door from the airport. The following day, a messenger arrived at their hotel with the missing case. The bones were still there, nestled in the underthingies. No one had bothered to rifle through her stuff. That could have added a whole new dimension to Jimmy Stewart's story. James Stewart, Army pilot, international film star, and smuggler. My all-time favorite Jimmy Stewart movie is the 1950 film Harvey. It's about a man who has a giant invisible rabbit as his companion. And I'm going to take a break here and play some commercials and give my throat a small break. We'll be right back after this, so stay tuned. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. Coffee makes the world go round, and around here we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. Makeup isn't something you want to just smear on and hope for the best. You might come out looking like Lon Chaney. Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and get a free makeover to see how makeup should be done. 956-723-3019.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
And welcome back to the show. And I see those folks from the roofing company are calling twice a day now. I wish they'd stop. Anyway, I seem to be talking about a bunch of old guys who all served in World War II and then became famous actors. Well, there are no actors or Hollywood people stranger than Ed Wood. Ed Wood Jr. was born in 1924 in Poughkeepsie, New York. In 1942, Ed enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, just months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was assigned to the 2nd Defense Battalion. He reached the rank of corporal before he was discharged. He was involved in the Battle of Tarawa, amongst others, and during the war, he lost his 2 front teeth to a Japanese soldier's rifle butt, and he was shot several times in the legs by a machine gun. Wood later claimed that he feared being wounded in battle more than he feared being killed. In 1947, Wood moved to Hollywood, California, where he wrote scripts and directed television pilots, the commercials, and several forgotten micro-budget westerns with names like Crossroads of Laredo and Crossroad Avenger, The Legend of the Tucson Kid. In 1948, Wood wrote, produced, directed, and starred in Casual Company, a play derived from his unpublished novel, which was based on his service in the United States Marine Corps. It opened at the Village Playhouse to very negative reviews on October 25th. In other words, the critics didn't like it, but then critics are usually wrong about everything they write about. I saw the name Crossroads of Laredo, and I had to have a look. Yikes. Ed took old footage from a black and white silent movie called The Streets of Laredo. He spliced it all together, and then he interjected scenes with him and others to try to make it into a movie. Ed was good at saving money, while he wasn't so good at making films. 1952, Wood was introduced to actor Bela Lugosi by friend and fellow writer and producer Alex Gordon. Bela was down on his luck and looking for any acting parts that might pay $1 or $2. Bela Lugosi had also been in the Army, only he was in during World War I, and he was on the other side. During World War I, Bela served as an infantryman in the Austro-Hungarian Army from 1914 to 1916. He rose to the rank of lieutenant. He was awarded the Wound Medal for wounds he suffered while serving on the Russian front. These wounds would come back to haunt him later in life. This led to him becoming addicted to morphine. Bela, along with some help from Ed, entered a clinic, and he managed to get off his addiction. Ed was in the habit of shooting film footage all over the place. He would get Lugosi to walk along the street or through a graveyard, and he would film him. The B-roll was to be used in other film projects as they came along. Bela's health took a turn for the worse, and he died in 1956. Ed took all the scenes of Bela walking around and spliced them together, and then he came up with Plan 9 from Outer Space. If you haven't seen it, don't bother. It is beyond a doubt the worst film ever made. Worse than Space Mutiny. I'd tell you the plot, but I don't think there is one. It did star Bela Lugosi, Mala Nurmi, a.k.a. Vampira, Tor Johnson, who was actually a professional wrestler. Each and every movie Ed made was on an absolute shoestring budget. He would borrow props from other movies and just incorporate them into the movie, even if they didn't fit. Every scene was done in one take to save money and film footage. The actors would either get it right or they would look bad on screen. Well, most of them looked bad on screen. What made Ed really stand out was his propensity to dress like a woman. He wasn't gay as far as anyone knows, but he liked women's clothes, especially on himself. He told his wife that his mother used to dress him like a girl, and it just kind of stuck. He was lucky it didn't have the same effect as what happened to Ed Gein. Ed Gein's mother dressed him like a girl, and he turned into a serial killer. Ed's mom already had a son, George, and now she wanted a daughter. So she dressed Ed up to look like a girl, and he was too young to know the difference. It wasn't until he went to school that the teacher discovered his plumbing, and Ed was told he was now a boy and had to dress appropriately. Once all of Ed's immediate family were dead, maybe by his hand, Ed got started making himself a girl suit using real girl parts, just like in the movie Silence of the Lambs. He also dug up his mom and had her stuffed and sitting in the back room, just like in Psycho. Ed never used a chainsaw, but he did cut up some of his guests and make chili from them. He was known around town for bringing food once in a while, and he specialized in chili with a zing. What was that about Greeks bearing gifts? Well, Ed Wood made a lot of movies. He made up for lack of talent with an abundance of creativity. By 1978, Ed and his wife were both broke. They'd made some bad investments and they'd spent a lot of money that they didn't have. They were now homeless and alcoholic. What little money they could get went into a bottle of whatever was handy and strong. They were staying at a friend's house, and Ed went in to lay on bed. He began yelling for his wife to bring him a drink, but she refused. He then yelled that he couldn't breathe, but his wife thought he was just trying to mess with her. Well, Ed died from a heart attack right after saying he couldn't breathe. Laszlo Lowenstein was born on June 26, 1904. He became a film actor better known as Peter Lorre. Lorre was a Jewish Hungarian and began his stage career in Vienna before moving to Germany, where he worked first on stage and later he moved to the silver screen. Sorry about that. He was on the silver screen in Berlin in the late 1920s and early 30s. Lorre caused an international sensation in the 1931 German film M, which was directed by Fritz Lang, where Lorre portrayed a serial killer who preyed on little girls. Peter Lorre always had a kind of a sleepy look, and he slurred his words. This was just written off as being his way of acting. Actually, Peter was addicted to morphine. He'd had an appendicitis operation, and the doctor had been way too free with the narcotics. This led to years of shooting up, all the time. Peter slurred his words because, well, he was wasted, and he looked half asleep because he was. When Hitler was about to seize power in Germany, Peter Lorre saw the writing on the wall and he took off for the United States. Once in the U.S., well, he was shipped back to England to film a movie, The Man Who Knew Too Much. This was an Alfred Hitchcock movie about criminals and kidnappings and murder. Oddly enough, Hitchcock went on to make a second movie by the same name, with a totally different plot. The second movie starred Jimmy Stewart. Peter Lorre was in The Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart. He still had that same look and way of speaking that the audience grew to love, but his fellow actors and the directors all knew that it was the drugs. Peter Lorre would take movie scripts only so long as they didn't interfere with his fix. He was shooting up all the time, but somehow managed to play his characters, and he didn't flub his lines. If the filming was to take place in the middle of nowhere, Lorre would pass on it because he didn't want to run the risk of running out of his drugs. That, combined with the fact that few drug suppliers lived in the middle of nowhere, since their clients all lived in town mostly. In Lorre's last years, he worked with Roger Corman on several low-budget films, including 2 of the director's Edgar Allan Poe movies. Tales of Terror, 1962, with Vincent Price and Basil Rathbone, and The Raven, 1963, again with Price, as well as Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson. Roger Corman is an interesting director. He never spent large sums of money making a movie. He told the actors if they didn't get their lines right, they were the ones who would look bad. He never lost money on any of his films. In fact, he made tons of money. Corman mentored and gave a start to many young film directors such as Francis Ford Coppola, Ron Howard, Martin Scorsese, Jonathan Demme, John Silas, and James Cameron. Cameron also helped launch the careers of actors like Corman. Corman also helped launch the careers of actors like Peter Fonda, Jack Nicholson, Dennis Hopper, Bruce Dern, Sylvester Stallone, Diane Ladd, and drumroll, please, William Shatner. All these world-famous actors all got their start being directed by Roger Corman. Some of Corman's movies started out as just the poster. They had the artwork, and then somebody had to write a screenplay to match up with the poster. One thing Corman was into was anything out of the ordinary. The Wild Angels, 1966, was a motorcycle gang movie starring Peter Fonda and Bruce Dern. Just to mix things up a bit, Corman brought in some real Hells Angels to work as extras and expert consultants. What could possibly go wrong? Altamont Speedway hadn't happened for another 4 years. And what was Altamont Speedway? Well, it was a giant rock concert where they were expecting 100,000 people to attend for a free concert. 300,000 showed up. The location was changed so many times nobody could get the proper facilities, things like bathrooms or tents. And to make things just a little more interesting, the management asked the Hells Angels to take care of security. What could possibly go wrong? Hippies and bikers. Marty Balin, the lead singer for Jefferson Airplane, wound up unconscious laying on the stage when one of the bikers decided he didn't like the singer. So Corman brought in some Hells Angels. And they discovered that the actors were all wearing colors. One of the bikers looked at Bruce Dern, called him a few choice names, and knocked his teeth out. Literally. Bruce was rushed to the hospital to get his mouth fixed, and the bikers announced no one was to wear their colors if they were not in the gang. Boy, have I gotten away from the story. Back to Peter's story. Lorre had suffered for years from chronic gallbladder trouble, for which doctors had prescribed even more morphine. Lorre became trapped between the constant pain and the addiction to morphine to ease the problem. He took a job playing Mr. Moto in a series of films that Lorre struggled with, trying to fulfill the role and somehow overcome his addiction. As he tried getting off morphine, he experienced a sudden weight gain of 100 pounds. Does this look like a little weight to you? He wasn't fully recovered from his addiction to morphine yet. In the movie Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lorre was mostly confined to a chair. He looked like a balloon, and his sleepy look and slurred speech were less noticeable. He died in 1964 from a stroke. His body was cremated, and his ashes were interred at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Hollywood. Vincent Price read the eulogy at the funeral. In 1956, Brenning, Lorre's third wife, bore his one and only child, Catherine. His daughter later made headlines when serial killer Kenneth Bianchi confessed to police investigators that he and his cousin and fellow hillside strangler Angelo Buono were posing as undercover police officers. They had stopped Catherine in 1977 with the intent of abducting and murdering her. They let her go when they learned that she was the daughter of Peter Lorre. It was only after Bianchi was arrested that Catherine realized whom she had been stopped by. I hate to think that the Hillside Stranglers were fans of the movie M. Peter Lorre played in a lot of movies opposite Vincent Price. They were usually either adversaries or co-workers who didn't get along. Price was born May 27, 1911 in St. Louis, Missouri. His grandfather, Vincent Clarence Price, had invented Dr. Price's baking powder, the first cream of tartar-based baking powder, and it had secured the family's fortune. Price attended the St. Louis Country Day School and Milford Academy in Milford, Connecticut. 1933, he graduated with a degree in art history from Yale University, where he worked on the campus humor magazine, the Yale Record. Most folks look at Price and they don't think humor, or art for that matter. After teaching for a year, Price entered the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, where he wanted to study for his master's degree in fine art. Fortunately, he was drawn to the theater. His first appearing on stage professionally was 1934. His acting career began in London 1935, performing with Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre. The Mercury Theatre were the folks who brought us the radio show, War of the Worlds, that scared a few people nearly to death. Price's first venture into the horror movie genre was in Boris Karloff's film Tower of London from 1939. The following year, Price portrayed the title character in The Invisible Man Returns. Claude Rains had starred in the first Invisible Man, although how can you star in a movie if you're invisible? Price tried his hand at radio by portraying Simon Templar, the Saint, which ran from 47 to 51 and was back when most folks didn't own TVs. 1958, Vincent starred in the movie The Fly, but he wasn't the fly. In the movie, a scientist has a horrific accident when he tries to use his newly invented teleportation device. David Hedison plays André Delambre. André Delambre. Darn French names. They're from Canada. André Delambre, the scientist who became one with a fly. Francis Delambre, the scientist's brother, is played by Vincent Price. 1960, Price achieved a number of low-budget filmmaking successes with Roger Corman, the director from earlier, and the American International Pictures, starring in The House of Usher, 1960. This low-budget movie earned over $2 million at the box office in the United States alone. This led to the subsequent movie adoption of other Edgar Allan Poe stories. They made The Pit and the Pendulum in 1961, Tales of Terror in 1962, The Comedy of Terrors 1963, along with Peter Lorre, who somehow managed to outshine Price and outlive him in the movie. Even though Peter Lorre was higher than a kite throughout the entire movie, he never flubbed his lines, he was always there on time, and he always did his job. Boris Karloff was also in the movie, but he was already nearing the end of his career. The Raven was filmed in 1963, The Mask of the Red Death in 1964, and The Tomb of Ligoe in 1964. All these movies were based on stories that were written by Edgar Allan Poe. During the early 1970s, Price hosted and starred in the BBC radio horror and mystery series The Price of Fear. He accepted a cameo part in Canadian children's television program The Hilarious House of Frightenstein in 1971, which was broadcast from Hamilton, Ontario, on the local television station CHCH. In addition to opening and closing monologues, his role in the show was to recite poems and various characters, sometimes wearing a cloak or other costume. Even once most households had TV sets, radio was still putting out mystery and horror shows on a regular basis. And now, it's time for a personal story once more. Mystery Theater was broadcast out of Chicago. They would come on late at night, and the stories were all frightening enough to be worth listening to. My brother had bought a small battery-operated radio. It had AM and FM, although there weren't many FM radio stations out there yet. Late at night, he'd turn on the radio and we'd listen. We had been told to be in bed by 10, and we were. We just weren't asleep. We're laying there in the dark listening to a horror show about some guy being pursued by a demon. The main character was walking slowly through the darkened room. His hand comes down on something covered in hair. And just then this huge piece of cardboard fell out of the window. We both nearly killed each other as well as ourselves. The sheet had crashed to the floor, and I was just glad neither of us had a movement. Due to the crashing sound and our punching each other in the darkness, we didn't hear the end of the show. I never did find out if the demon killed the main character or not. Price's voice is heard on Alice Cooper's first solo album, Welcome to My Nightmare, from 1975, and he appeared in the corresponding TV special Alice Cooper, The Nightmare. A funny thing about growing up when I did, I listened to Alice Cooper. I thought he was cool. My folks kept harping on me that I should listen to decent musicians like John Denver. Alice Cooper doesn't drink or do drugs. John Denver was drunk when he crashed his plane after forgetting to fuel up before taking off. 1979, Price starred with his wife in a short-lived CBS TV series, Time Express. He hosted the hour-long amusement park and roller coaster television special, America Screams, riding on many of the roller coasters and giving a critique on how the coaster ride went. During 1979 to 80, he hosted the Mystery Night segment of the radio series Sears Radio Theater. Vincent Price was still active in the art world. 1957, impressed by the spirit of the students of a community college, Vincent Price and Mary Grant Price donated 90 pieces from their private collection and a large amount of money to establish the Vincent Price Art Museum at East Los Angeles College in Monterey Park, which was the first teaching art collection owned by a community college in the United States. They ultimately donated 2,000 pieces to the collection, which contains 9,000 today, and has been valued in the excess of $5 million. Price was also into cooking. Mary and Vincent Price Present a National Treasury of Cooking was a 5-volume series packaged in a box set and published by Heirloom Publishing Company. Later on, these 5 books were combined into a single book and published as Mary and Vincent Price Come Into the Kitchen Cookbook, a collector's treasury of America's greatest recipes. Most of Price's cookbooks remain in print throughout the 70s. Come Into the Kitchen is available for $25. A Treasury of Great Recipes, the 50th anniversary edition, can be bought for $40. You can still find all of his books out there. Price's career spanned many different types of entertainment: drama, mystery, thriller, comedy. He appeared on stage, television, and radio, and he was in more than 100 films. He has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one for motion pictures and one for television. Since he was born and raised near St. Louis, Missouri, he has a star on the St. Louis Walk of Fame as well. Price was against prejudice, either for race or religion. He would talk about it on the radio at the end of some of his shows. He said that Americans must actively fight against it because racial and religious prejudice within the United States fuels support for the nation's enemies. Price suffered from emphysema, a result of being a lifelong smoker, and he had Parkinson's disease. His symptoms were especially severe during the filming of Edward Scissorhands, making it necessary to cut his filming schedule very short. He died of lung cancer October 25, 1993, at the UCLA Medical Center at the age of 82. The Marvel character, Doctor Strange, was inspired by Vincent Price. Dr. Stephen Strange, who first appeared in July 1963 issue number 110 of Strange Tales, was created by artist Steve Ditko. And among the principal inspirations for Marvel's mystical superhero was Chandu the Magician and legendary horror icon Vincent Price, who played a powerful sorcerer in the film The Raven, which was released the same year as Strange's arrival. Well, I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. It was interesting to come up with these stories. And you'll notice they're all older actors. In fact, I believe they're all dead. I don't watch that many movies anymore. Not like when I was young. When I was a kid, me and my brother would stay up all night watching any horror movies that were on, especially on those weird hosted TV shows like Movie Macabre and Lenny's Inferno and things like that. Any horror movie, didn't matter good or bad, I would watch it. Today, horror movies seem to be mostly CGI, and usually it's a bunch of teenagers doing things that they shouldn't do and then getting killed in mostly comical means. Well, hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. Invite them to listen as well. If you didn't like tonight's show, keep it to yourself. Nobody wants to hear that. If you'd like to contact the show, you can reach me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. The archives can be found on both YouTube and Podomatic, as well as Stitcher and just about anything else, iTunes. I'm all over the place. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.